The roll call, please.
Trustee Cornell, Trustee Miller,
Here.
Trustee Mulvaney, here. Trustee Pierce, Trustee Thomas,
Here.
Trustee Freed.
Here. Have a quorum. Okay. I wanted to mention, just as long as we're all here talking before Trustee Free gives us the financial report, something that we did talk about in the Finance Committee, but also last night there were further developments on it when I was at the Northwest Municipal Conference. To talk to the board about. The state has, as of now, and we've talked about, ceased making payments to the villages and to us and other local governments on the use taxes that come in, the motor fuel taxes and the E911 revenues and taxes. And the theory behind that is that they didn't adopt the budget and they didn't pass a separate bill for the purpose of continuing an authorization, even though the state collects those taxes, to pay them to the local governments. And so they are just accumulating in the state treasury, so to speak. There was introduced in the House a bill that will come up shortly to try to give authorization, House Bill 4305, to give authorization to pass through those revenues going forward. Although when one sits and talks to all of the various representatives, none of them actually expect that that will pass through the House or get adopted by the Senate, and if adopted by the House and Senate, signed by the governor. So we have the fact that through the end of our fiscal year at this moment, we're looking at the possibility that none of those taxes will be passed through. That's a little different situation than what we have with the distributive share, which under the continuing resolutions and under the law is automatically supposed to be passed through, and we still have the governor and a number of people recommending that the state law on that, as part of a budget deal, be changed to take that back to help pay for the state's costs. In addition, one of the things that we have learned both in talking to the state controller and as you talk to all the representatives, the state is burning money at a very high rate, approximately $500 million or more a month, more than the revenues that it takes in. And there's a real concern or belief that probably by the end of this year, December 31st, the state will be out of money. If not, then by sometime in April, it's likely that they will be out of money. So the state is in the position of trying to figure out what exactly that means and how that will affect the revenues and taxes that the state collects and is supposed to pass through to the local municipalities. So all of that is up in the air. There appears to have been no real discussions between the legislature and the governor for the past several weeks because everybody's off getting ready to run for re-election in terms of the state legislature. So we have those issues pending. We also have pending a whole bunch of issues where the municipalities have been calling to the attention of the state the high cost of unfunded mandates, which is generally what we spend the money that we get out of our share of taxes on. In looking at it, as we mentioned in the Finance Committee, the village of Glencoe, for example, just taking 4 of the unfunded mandates alone for 2016 is facing a cost of in excess of $2.5 million. So they are very meaningful, and that has been one of the big discussion points between the governor and the legislature as to what to do with that. Having mentioned that, I think those are some of the key points. There are many other ways that I could mention more detail on that, but we are in discussions with the legislature and the governor trying to see if there isn't some solution to all of this, but at the moment it does not look like we're moving towards that. The state has toyed with the idea that since they are under injunctive relief from several judges to pay certain costs, such as the salaries of state employees and certain expenses the state funds for various health and other things, that it may be that they will feel that under those restraints, they are entitled to take the state funds that are building up that are not being passed through to the local governments and just spend that on the state's expenses once it runs out of money at the end of the year. So there's a lot going on and a lot of uncertainty, and Illinois remains Illinois, which is subject to all sorts of things that one never expected to have going on at this moment in time. With that background and with the easy things that that does for us trying to plan a budget for next year, I would ask Trustee Reed to report on what we talked about at the Finance Committee.
Yeah. Well, two things that we talked about at the Finance Committee, or the Finance meeting. The first just being the current state of things. Generally, when we look at the funds of the village, everything is in good shape. While the state is having a lot of problems and making it more difficult for us, Phil and the rest of the staff have done a very good job in terms of keeping expenses below plan. Revenues are coming in above plan for the general fund. And so while we are looking at the state not providing as much as they have in the past, our fund is ahead of plan for the general fund. The water fund would be the only one that is actually coming in under plan. And it's, I've mentioned it every month, it's the wet summer. But the cash balance is in very good shape, and there is nothing at this point that we have to do to offset what's been a wet summer and not a high-use water summer. So anyway, so the funds are all in good shape. We spent the bulk of the meeting discussing the future and the long-range plan and some of the things that we think will be important as we progress over the next 5 years. When we look at the long-range plan, certain things really do jump out. I think the main one will be that expenditures are expected to grow substantially faster than revenues. When we look at the next 5 years, our revenues are expected to grow in total a little over 3.5%. Our expenditures are expected to grow in total a little under 10%. That's in contrast to the past 7 years, where revenues grew slightly faster than expenses. So we are heading into a very different environment than what we've seen over the last 7 years. So as we go forward, there are things that we will have to talk about as far as how do we balance our budget, how do we make sure that we can provide the services we need to provide and have the money to provide it in a very tight budget environment. So we will continue to talk about these things. We're going through the process of now looking at all of the services that we provide as a village, how we pay for them, how they fit into our expense reports, or how they fit into our expenses, not just reports, and evaluating things, because we are in an expected tight environment, and that does not include what the state may do to our $3.5 million in revenue that we get from them. We are uncertain as to how that will be affected. Right now, it's been held back. The expectation, I think, is still that we'll see some of that. Not the $3.5 million, but the motor fuel tax, the E911, and the use tax. But there's still question as to some of the other taxes that the state collects and then pays back to us. So we're in an environment where we will have to plan. And our goal as a finance committee is to maintain flexibility for the village going forward. And that's why I think we will spend a lot of time continuing to talk about how the next 5 years may progress and how we can prepare for a variety of environments. So,
Thank you. Tonight in the Committee of the Whole, we discussed two subjects among the board. One was a question that the staff had for them to think about what to present to the board in the future with respect to building fees with relation to permits that do not get executed within the 12 to 15 months expected, and how those get charged, and what do we do with situations that are beyond the control of the owner of the property. And the other subject we discussed is the 5 strategic priorities that we had talked about at our workshop and have continued to talk about how to use those, how those relate to the budget process and to other things that the board does. And as is good for a board like ours, who talks to each other a lot, we're still in discussion. So that'll be a continuing topic that will come up either at a workshop or at a future committee of the whole meeting. But I thought the discussion was useful and has given staff some ideas on things to bring forward as we move on. The next order of business is the consideration of the consent agenda. Is there anything on the consent agenda that any of the trustees would like to discuss or remove from the consent agenda? If not, may I have
Mr.
a
President,
motion?
before we do approve the consent agenda, there's a Scrivener's error in the draft committee of the whole minutes, and we are going to make that change. It is on page 2, the bottom paragraph. There's an extra word that confuses the sentence. It's on the 3rd line, so we will remove that extra word, which is unless, and following the approval of the minutes.
With that, we'll even know what the minutes say. So with that amendment in mind, could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney.
Yes.
Trustee Pierce.
Yes.
Trustee Thomas.
Yes.
Trustee Vree.
Yes.
This is the point in time where we normally ask if there is anybody in the audience that would like to address the board on an item that is not on the agenda. Okay. Then I'm ready for the village manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple of things this evening to report out on. Sheridan Road construction is underway. Asphalt grinding began this week from north to south through Glencoe, and the majority of curb replacement has been completed. Next up is base patching, expected to occur over the next several weeks, followed, weather permitting, by application of new asphalt service and road striping before the end of November, we're hoping. We do expect some traffic impacts over the coming weeks, but our hope is that traffic will remain open in both directions. I know there's been some difficulty in getting through the ravine area in Winnetka because of some of the underground work that they're doing. My understanding is that that's starting to wrap up, so any delays that folks have experienced from that part of the construction hopefully are starting to find their way to the complete zone. I also wanted to mention that the village's contractor is prepping to commence our sanitary sewer lining effort this fall, still in various locations throughout the community. This work will be underway sometime in the next several weeks. This is work that actually provides very little disruption associated with it, so impacts to the neighborhoods where we're working should be minimal and confined to daytime hours. We will have information out on Glencoe Connect and the website as soon as we know the schedule for that. Also, our leaf collection program is underway for the year, started this week, and it will conclude at the end of November. A great deal of information on the program is available on our website, including the collection map, which is helpful as you're placing leaves at the curb. All of that, as I said, is on the village's website. We are going to be sharing that information through our social media outlets as well. An important reminder, though, related to this program: leaves should be raked and left on parkway areas rather than raked into the streets. Raking leaves into the streets does clog storm sewer inlets in the event of rain and keeps streets from appropriately draining. We'd ask just to remind residents to assist the village in keeping stormwater inlets clear by removing leaves and keeping any leaves that you pile for village collection behind the curb line. A nice thing that we'd also ask is, if folks can, to adopt the nearest storm sewer inlet near their home and keep an eye on it during rain events. That does help to keep them clear during rainstorms, which have been few this fall, but we still are in the storm's eye from time to time. And that's all I have this evening.
Okay. Trustee Thomas, do you have a report of the Golf Advisory Committee, or is that next Monday that they meet?
That's next Monday, and thank you for letting me go ahead of my wife, because her report will be much more informative and professional than mine. Basically, the only thing I have to say as far as the Golf Advisory Committee goes is, and it's somewhat of a broken record, weather has continued not to cooperate as far as golf operations are concerned. On the other hand, it continues to be the case that because of Stella's careful management, we are doing better than budget, and will do better than budget through the remainder of the year. And we have been able to undertake necessary repairs and improvements on the course in a measured fashion. So we're doing as well as can be under the circumstances, and that's the report.
Thank you. The best part of our evening is that we are going to get an update on the village's comprehensive plan for downtown from Karen Thomas, who is, as Trustee Thomas says, will give a much more professional and much more exciting report than his.
Wants to make sure he gets dinner next week. One of the most exciting parts of doing this is we have a tradition of the mice not working at our plan commission meetings. Do we not?
Yes,
We have a great tradition, so we're going to see if it works.
right behind
Yeah, that's a good thing. So we're delighted to be here. Myself, village planner E. Brown, Dave Mount, head of public works, plan commission member Dudley Underdon, who is also our park district representative, plan commission member Ed Goodale, who has worn so many hats. I think your current hat is zoning, but you've also been our historic preservation representative. I think you've also been at large. So thank you for being here. Most of the time when I have the privilege of coming and talking to the trustees, I talk about it and I have almost no slides whatsoever. I'm kind of known for that, like almost none. And there's an exception to every rule, and tonight's the exception. And I think it's because we have so much to share with you that we're very proud of and very excited about, that it's hard not to show you in visuals what we can do. So tonight's going to be about big picture, to really give you a sense of the scope of our work, the approach we've taken to our work, and our process. We received a referral late in 2013 to update the village's comprehensive plan, which is a policy guideline document. It's not a regulatory document in the sense of the statute. It provides overall guidance to the shape of planning policies, standards, and benchmarks. And it's periodically updated. It used to be that updates were done every 20 years. That's generally no longer the case. Communities tend to do much more frequent updates now. So our comprehensive plan overall dates from 1996. And in 1996, I was in the audience, and when the Plan Commission needed a volunteer to help wordsmith and just edit for grammar, I volunteered to do that and got to sit with Plan Commissioner Shubar, who I think was the trustee representative then, and read through every single word of that plan. In 2004, Chapter 10 of the Comprehensive Plan, which deals solely with downtown, was revised. And the trustees felt that it really needed to be updated and modernized, together with taking the very simple depiction of downtown on the plan map for the comprehensive plan and doing a specific detailed map of downtown. The text of Chapter 10 was redone in 2004. The map never was. So in terms of our work now, we are starting from the fundamentals of having what is still a very solid and good piece of work in Chapter 10. As we reviewed it, we all felt, boy, this really holds up. We just need to update it. But we're really starting from the beginning on our plan. So while it's very timely for us to do this, it's not urgent, it's not in response to a problem, it is proactive, responsible planning, and it's such a pleasure to be able to work on something where we don't have an urgency and we're not trying to scramble to solve a problem, but we can take our time. And that's exactly what we've done. I'm doing the right click. What happened?
Yeah, right.
That's what I did. There we go. So, our approach divided our work into 4 phases. The first is preparation and doing our own homework. The second, listening and learning. The third, framing issues and policy. And finally, creating recommendations. We are now at the end of phase 3. So in phase 1, we did 3 things. We studied our own history. We learned about best practices and received tutorials from our expert staff. And we commenced our own journey, if you will, with a SWOT analysis that was done by every single plan commissioner. In terms of studying history, we reviewed the current 1996 plan, Chapter 10 from 2004, we went back to 1972 and reviewed the village's 72 plan. We had an exceptional presentation by Scott Jabor, who taught us about the history of our village in pictures and in text. And we learned about how we evolve as a community and as a central business district. Our tutorials included best practices for comprehensive plans, best practices for the process, and best practices for planning maps. This was our SWOT analysis, and this was the true kickoff of the active phase of our work. We all went out, and I did this in 2006 for the village court parking lot. But for most of the other commissioners, it was their first SWOT analysis of our downtown. It is a totally different experience to walk our downtown block by block and building by building, and to think about the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and traditionally called threats, but it really means challenges, things that concern us. We took pictures of each one. We talked about the reasons for our choices. Staff then compiled them. We did a very interesting session where we looked at the groupings and discussed the different points of view. And it was really a tremendous way to begin. As we went into the listening and learning phase, a big concern of ours was outreach. You know, everybody's busy. Everybody wants to participate, and we're all too busy. So we were trying to figure out, how do we get people's attention, and how do we do things that are interesting enough, and attractive enough, and intriguing enough that people will engage with us? So one of the things we did was to create an app site and a mobile app. And they proved to be very popular. I actually wrote a blog, and which was a new experience for me and lots of fun. We had questions of the day, we had surveys, we had opportunities to update people on information that we were getting at our meetings. And this is a very interesting vehicle because we even talked about whether something like the app would have later application in terms of promoting our downtown. The next thing we did, which was maybe the most popular thing, and hopefully most of you saw it and participated, were the Candy Chang Idea chalkboards. And they were up mostly really for the full summer. And the chalkboard said, downtown Glencoe would be better if, and there was chalk, and people could simply write what they wanted. Our hope was that people would enjoy it and it would have a little bit of attention, and we kind of anticipated that we would be erasing the full board once or twice a week. In the end, staff was erasing that board multiple times per day. There were so many people participating and writing. We photographed every single board. We tabulated all of the results. You see our pie chart on the right. Not a surprise, food and beverage, people wanted more and more and more places to gather and to be together and to enjoy food and drink in the village. I remember walking to the beach on July 4th and the families in front of me and the families behind me were all discussing with their children what they had written on the chalkboard. So we were very pleased with that. Our Imagine Glencoe felt board at the library was also a big success because the kids could also move the streets around. It didn't have to be straight. And so we saw some very creative and interesting ideas, and the children were starting to think about downtown differently, and they were talking to their parents about it. Many of you saw a poster that was up for quite a long time. I had hoped to have the original here, but it's inside the Charisse building now, so this was a version of it. And the traditions and innovations is not an accident. Early on, as we studied our history and thought about it, we discovered something very interesting about this village. We all joke about the fact that our motto is progress without change, and it's always spoken of as something very negative. In fact, there's a positive message inside that negative mantra. And the positive message is that we have actually been a highly innovative village, a highly innovative community. And that the innovations that we have imagined and brought to fruition in our village have turned into our traditions. So we have embraced progress. We just haven't embraced change that doesn't make any sense. And what we learned is that, for example, we were the first council manager form of government in the state, 13th in the nation in 1914. First combined fire, police, EMS in the state, 1954. First fully accredited fire and police organization in the world. We created a very unique unified school district. I think that was in the 80s. When our village was platted in the 1800s, do you know that it was platted with Lakefront Park? We were one of the first communities to have a planned, required open space near the lake. We were one of the first to pass zoning regulations. And when the streets were platted, the village founders went against what was then the tradition, which was for a grid, and they created something called picturesque town planning, which deliberately went against the grid to create beautiful, tranquil, and picturesque street layouts. And in our case, and fortunately so, the original plat created streets that followed our ravine system. And so we have these beautiful, circular, curving street systems that were totally unique at the time. And the result of those, of course, is not only the beauty of the community, but the respect for natural topography, which we now know is very important. And finally, it preserved our ravines, which we can be highly grateful for, because as we learned during our steep slope work, the ravines carry 50% of our stormwater. Always did, and still do. Some of you may have seen the stacked blocks at the library. These were also very popular. They were kind of then and now. Then our outreach included specialized panels before the Plan Commission. This is something that we also did in 2004. It was a big success then and a great benefit to the Plan Commission. And these were the specialized groups. Cultural resources included writers' theater representatives, art gallery representatives. We had a very interesting group, and I'm blanking right now on all of the participants. Library was there, yes, as a cultural resource. Building owners, appears twice, and that's incorrect. One was building owners, and one's a different panel were the people that own businesses in the village, and we wanted to separate them, to talk separately with them. The executive directors of our public bodies, civic leaders, developers, transit advisors. Enormously useful to be able to listen, to learn, and to dialogue, and then to hear them talk to each other. Because the way our panels work is after short presentations, we ask the panel to dialogue with one another. And here's a little bit of what we learned, big picture and specifics. Specifics, the same themes came up over and over again. We need better wayfinding. We need a better sign ordinance, and we need a better way to create signage in the downtown so that it's easy to negotiate, it's easy to understand, and it promotes our village. We need future developmental guidelines, because if we ever do have development of any sites in the downtown, the developers and other leaders told us they don't want a blank slate. They want to know what are the planning concerns the benchmarks, the values that the village has to create a framework for any kind of development that occurs in the village. Special events came up again and again. The improved utilization of open space, including wine and green, came up again and again. The big picture ideas we heard were Glencoe downtown is a neighborhood. It's the heart of the village and the heart of the community. It's our agora, our central fire in the tribal village. It's a place, it's our third place after home and work, where people want that meet and greet quality. They want that protected by law. And it's the place where intersections become connections. We're small, but we're not simple. We learned that we have as much complexity as some of the biggest communities. And I came to think of us as a thorn room, a complex environment miniaturized. Some of you may remember the thorn rooms at the Art Institute. They're taking your kids there. They're actual replica rooms of historic environments down to the last tiny detail. And that's what we are. We're small, but we're not simple. And we can't simply undertake the revision of the plan by assuming that there are simple solutions and that we don't need data and we don't need to provide. 3 organizational themes really emerged from that learning and listening process as we began to tackle different issues. And a 4th was an important principle. First, our downtown's not broken. This is a tune-up. We're the envy of so many communities. And we learned through the outside expert in economic development that village planner Lee Brown brought in to help us. We learned that we have qualities as an economic micro market that are the envy of many others. The other civic leaders and people that have worked in other communities all came and said, you know, we often look to Glencoe because this downtown has remained vibrant and it has an amazing quality to it. So the second one is we are an economic ecosystem. We're not a big one, but we are an ecosystem. And if any of you ever went up to the Milwaukee Natural History Museum, there was a big display in the rainforest exhibit, and it's like this giant leaf, and the leaf is curved, and there's all this stuff going on in the curve, and there's water there, and the sign says, this is a complete ecosystem. The creatures that live here never leave the leaf, ever, and they don't have to, because it's a total ecosystem. And that's how I think of us now. We are an economic ecosystem, and so we have to think in a very sophisticated way, but on a miniature scale. Infrastructure, parking, transportation, accessibility, big theme. That has to do not only with aspects of the downtown that we control, such as roads, parking regulations, and accessibility, but it's about circulation. It's about being walkable and how we encourage pedestrians more. It's about thinking about bicycles and alternative forms of transportation. So there's a lot packed into that. And the third one, urban formula-built environment, is really about the 3-dimensional physical space that is downtown. And it actually includes volumes of air, as I will show you shortly. So it's not broken. We've been studying the areas over which we have control: rights-of-way, streets, sidewalks, streetscapes, utilities, parking areas. We're thinking about what should be shared between the village and our public partners, events, how we use public property, green space, open space, collaborating with other of our sister bodies, wayfinding, gateways, also very important. We're also thinking about the responsibility of property owners and tenants. We want to be a partner to our businesses and building owners. We want to help them thrive, but we want to do it in a way that's responsible to all of the citizens of Glencoe and everyone who uses and visits the village. Economic ecosystem. Our excellent expert working with staff undertook analysis for us of a market analysis and also an examination of what it's like to do business. This is not the night that I'm really going to present the data, but we have data. We will have an economic report. We have a white paper on it, and so we're very really believe in the necessity of having the very highest level of data in order to guide us. The categories that you see, where it says pedestrian convenience and destination, are 3 bubbles around the downtown. The pedestrian is a 5-minute distance walking, the convenience is a 10-minute, and the destination is a 20-minute. And it's giving us very interesting information about the population and about the relative degrees of spending. It's interesting that the convenience area almost is codeterminous with the boundaries of our village, which Bridget Lane tells us is quite unusual and a big benefit to us in terms of capturing the Glencoe market in our downtown. We learned about startup costs for businesses, which are, as you can see, much more expensive for the restaurants that we would love to have here than they are for other businesses. One of the assumptions that we often hear is, well, if the rents weren't so high, we would have more businesses here. And why don't we give rebates to business? Why don't we give them a break on signs? And what we learned is that that's a myth. That actually the rents are a relatively small part of the overall cost of doing business here, and the rebates really hardly matter at all. In terms of attracting business and keeping it, it's not a debate about whether people are paying too much per square feet. It's a debate about who we are. The advice and counsel that we've been receiving from not only the panels, but our own experts tell us that people don't want a big box or an internet all the time. They also want something special. And that what we need to be is the very, very best Glencoe. Because if we can be the very, very best Glencoe, then we will create an environment where the businesses will be able to thrive. Some of the other key takeaways from our study of our economic ecosystem is that retail versus service industries, which used to be one of the classic divisions in zoning and still is in our code and in most others, you know what? It's a red herring now. In a way, it doesn't even matter. Retail businesses also provide services. Service businesses sometimes end up doing more in retail. And there isn't a clear division anymore. So we need to revisit those categories in our zoning ordinance. We need to do a zoning audit as part of the work that goes into this chapter. The theme that we heard for the future is multiple uses in multi-use spaces. You can't really pin down a single use and hold someone only to that. And the most successful spaces that are being built now and built for the future are those that in a sense are convertible. A space that can be rented by the day or by the half day for office space during the weekday and turn into an event space on the weekend and be an art gallery once a month and be a gathering place on some other occasion. To think more flexibly about how we use space and what we permit, and to think only in terms of appropriateness rather in terms of old-fashioned categories that are already outdated. These are some of the strategies that we're exploring to create a policy plan for economic sustainability. We know that sustainability, which of course a huge part of it is environmental responsibility, but that's not the only part of it. We have to be sustainable as a community from an economic standpoint. We have to think about downtown as a civic place, as a neighborhood, having complicated roles and places within it, and the shift away from the traditional workplace. And that will all be part of the material in the plan on economic ecosystem. Moving on to infrastructure, we engaged KLOA as an outside expert to take the parking data that we already have and to generate new data that would be current and could help us assess both our parking situation and parking needs for the future. We also included a number of other issues under the infrastructure umbrella, all of them very, very critical. This is, where's my page? Here it is. This is just an example of the new parking data that we collected. It's an hour-by-hour analysis of every section of downtown to show which ones were occupied and to what percentage at that particular hour of the day. So we're thinking macro, but we're looking at micro data in order to be on a really sound footing. This is one of the most interesting slides that village planner Lee Brown brought us. Here's our downtown on the left, and on the right is Old Orchard. Now, if you ask people coming to shop here whether they want to park east of the train station, you're going to hear a lot of people say, oh my God, that's too far away, I can't possibly park there, nobody's going to park there. But if you look at Old Orchard, the spaces on the right, just within the yellow lines, are typically where I park when I'm walking all the way over to the left side of Old Orchard, and I often do the reverse. So my perception of distance when I'm at Old Orchard is very different than my perception of distance when I'm in the village of Glencoe. So one of the things that we are studying and thinking about is perception, because perception is as important in parking as its availability. We also are learning about things like apps, which can find you the nearest parking place. We obviously don't have that technology in the village, but it's extremely interesting to consider. And we know that looking ahead, in addition to the intermodal mix, we also have to anticipate that, who knows, there may be a time when there are driverless cars. So parking is one of the most dynamic areas, and we know there's never enough, but there's been a lot to learn. Wayfinding has been a huge theme that's come up, and that includes gateway identification. We don't even know where Glencoe is, we passed it, oh, we missed the turn. We don't have good gateway signs into the downtown or into the village. This came up in 2004 and it came up in 1996. We need to do something about that. We need to make sure that we're visible. We need to make sure that people can find the businesses they're looking for and know what's here. And so we've seen many examples. These are simply prototypes, but we've been thinking about signage and wayfinding. We've also been thinking about and learning about the things that enhance the experience of being downtown. Things like lighting and banners and special pavers that contribute to a sense of place and a sense of experience. Finally, our third theme and organizational principle is that of urban form. So the simple definition is it's what makes us enjoy being in the downtown, how we understand the space. But it's really, if you think of the three-dimensional model of the downtown, it's the volumes, it's the physical built environment. And when we look at our downtown, this is a wonderful example of complexity in miniature. We can actually identify Tudor Court as an emerging arts area, if you will. Core retail along Park Avenue, which is always our most heavily trafficked area. Emerging restaurants on Vernon Avenue that may end up clustering there with the Grand at the southern section. We definitely have a civic, almost subsection. And then we have the sad place down at the south that I can't, does it say no man's land on this one? Yeah, we called it no man's land because, you know, when you enter the village at the southern end, at the downtown, you kind of feel like you're in the back door, and it kind of feels like it isn't any place. And we know that there's potential there. Should the village choose to make public land available, there's a potential there for some kind of new construction. This is a depiction of what are called the outdoor rooms in downtown. We measure the volume of the space in the public street, building to building, and the height and the depth. And what's significant about this is that the ratio on Park Avenue of 1 to 3 is the ideal ratio that planners try to achieve. That's the ratio where people feel most comfortable, happiest. It's just big enough, it's just wide enough, it's just tall enough, it's comfortable, it's appealing. We have it in our core retail. And one of the things that we want to do, to the extent that there are changes in the downtown, is to try to maintain as closely as we can an adherence to that 1 to 3, that just by, who knows, well, maybe it was great planning, maybe it was accident, that we found we have. We have some variation from that. And in the no man's land, interestingly enough, that's where we depart from it the most. And so this also gives us a way to talk about what will we need to do if that southern section was developed in order to have it feel as good as Park Avenue and integrate and connect to the parts of the downtown that really work and are really great. This was the last piece of inquiry that we made before sort of turning now to what will become the last phase of our work. This is the southern part of downtown. It's our no man's land. We're also starting to call it Tomorrowland, because who knows what will happen tomorrow. And what we did was we labeled the publicly owned properties separately. And then we began to look at various prototypical scenarios of how the streets might be optimally configured if one or more of those pieces were available for development. We looked at whether we might have a multi-story garage. We looked at whether there might be room for a little inn if Writers Theater brings us many visitors, people that would eat at our restaurants and shop in our stores. We thought about intensity of use and massing of buildings, and we came up with 5 different prototypes that all shared certain core values and principles. And they were connecting to the rest of downtown. Don't build some big massive thing in isolation. Walkability, make it just as inviting and walkable. Try to get close to that 1 to 3. Make sure that there's a green canopy and that the volume has that feeling. Make sure that no one building is too large. Encourage multiple buildings rather than 1 or 2 each buildings. And try to optimize circulation so that the street that C, Temple Court, no longer is the back door to the village, but could also be the southern gateway into downtown. And so the last piece of our work that I want to mention to you is the planning map, which we don't really have in the 96 version. We didn't do it in 04. And so it's really going to be done from scratch now. And the direction that the staff has been taking in the tutorials that we've had and the discussions that we've had, the commission is very supportive, is that, again, we're small, but we're not simple. So we're probably going to have 3 maps. We'll probably have a map that's called a bubble diagram, which is a big picture view. It's that zoom out. And then we'll probably have a map that sets out some of the concepts and values that we've discovered are shared really by most of the people that have talked to us and that are very important if we're going to preserve the essential character and specialness of this community. And then the third one will be the zoom in, and that's going to actually be the land use map, where we'll go building to building and where if we have some ideas for open spaces that are underutilized, for example, Lyman, that you'll see possibilities. Those maps are not going to say this is the way it has to be. They're going to say, these are some of the opportunities and the possibilities, applying certain concepts. And there are lots of different ways to apply them. And here's one possible vision, but we're going to hope that we encourage a lot of creative thinking going forward. We do not want to have any of this be something that binds too close. We want it to secure progress without change, namely innovation that fits in with the great traditions of the village. So thank you very much. If you have questions, if you have things that you are anxious to have us consider, we so welcome that. We really are very anxious to make sure that we're doing the work that fits with what you feel you need. You have a most capable representative in the commission, vice chair. Barbara has shouldered an enormous amount of the load and really worked with staff every inch of the way. We're incredibly fortunate in the commission that we have. We have outstanding professionals in land use, such as Dudley and Ed, who happen to be on the commission at the moment. Mario Morris, who's a distinguished planner. Tom Sheckelhoff, who's also an architect. And then we have our non-land use people who bring a completely fresh perspective. So the commission's worked hard, we've taken our time, and thank you for the opportunity to undertake the work.
As I said, informative and professional.
As always, Karen, a phenomenally good presentation and very educational, and we appreciate your coming here and taking the time to bring us up this.
Anybody have a specific question?
Hi, thanks. First off, thanks. That's great. Thank you for all the efforts for the whole team. I thought it was interesting we didn't once mention Writers Theater, which I think is a major driver here, or at least it has been. And I was wondering if you might just comment briefly if there was an intentional omission or just really not relevant to this stage.
You know, it's a really good point here, and no, not at all an intentional omission. One of the interesting things about the timing of the plan is that there had been discussion about doing a map and an update actually as far back as, I want to say 6 years ago, and at the time when we looked at it, we felt internally that it was foolish, if not foolhardy, to go forward with a revision of the downtown plan until we knew what Writers Theater was going to do. So Writers has been very much a part of the discussions and thinking, for example, on parking, circulation. We've talked about I'm not sure I can get back to it. I'm going to do some good going backwards here. But I'm trying to get to your reform map. I think I gotta go back, right? Or forward? No, gotta go forward. I'm gonna show this to you. There it is. So when you look up at the top, when we have discussed the little subsections of downtown, we've really talked about Tudor becoming a special place, and a special place that was connected and identified with the idea of the arts. That might be, for example, when it's time to review the street, that might be through very distinctive pavers, through different signage, maybe special lighting, maybe special banners, but to recognize that we have sort of an extraordinary cultural resource in the downtown, and to call it out on that block in a way that makes it very special. Yes, that's another excellent point. You know, there's so much that we've done that I'm sure I'm forgetting, you know, not bringing you some of the information that you want. One of the other things we've talked about is being important. Of course, we focused on the land and the buildings and the space that we control as a village. But there are some significant private spaces that, you know, have some import moving forward. One of those is the Harris drive-thru. And it's important because it operates as a visual gateway to the theater, and the front door of the theater lines up with that pass-through. It's also an important way that patrons can find their way to Village Court in the evening to find convenient parking. So at one of our meetings, we had a Harris representative, and we were kind of talking about whether they really needed all 3 lanes, and if they didn't, might there be an opportunity to create a really beautiful pass-through that maybe it could even be an arcade. Maybe we could create an arcade that, if any of you have been at the Burlington Arcade in London, or there's actually a small one, I think, is it Lake Forest or Lake Bluff that created it? Highwood, that's right. We saw a picture of one in Highwood, and that we could create, again, something special and visually very appealing that would be the gateway from our tiny little arts cultural area into the heart of the retail. So a number of issues touch on writers. Also the relationship between writers and the library, because we really see the library as we study it as one of our great cultural institutions. It's so important to everyone in this community. And the library, of course, had a tradition of showing movies, and the Women's Library Club. We want to encourage that those continued relationships. So there's a lot of potential in terms of what we can do to strengthen the cultural footprint, if you will. And when the '04 plan was revised for downtown, and I was on the commission then, but not chairing it, the only thing that every single person agreed on was support for the cultural arts in Glencoe. That was the one thing that every resident, every business owner, everybody said, that's valuable. We want to, if we can have more arts education, more arts opportunities, more arts institutions in Glencoe, that's a good thing. So I personally, I see writers as an outgrowth of what we saw in '02 as a desire, and we had no idea how we could ever provide that. And we were talking about maybe the Old School of Folk Music would want to have a branch here, and we had no idea how to do it. So it actually fulfills something that was really expressed as a longing by a lot of people 10 years ago. So it is important.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Karen. That was enlightening for me. One of the questions I had was just how much discussion do you guys put into incentivizing businesses and organizations, whatever, to come in and carry out the vision that you guys have come up with? In what ways can we as the board help, the village board help in terms of creating an environment that incentivizes some of the, whether it's changes or different uses of the land? What are we doing to try and carry some of that stuff out?
Well, this is a very interesting policy question that is probably going to be coming back to you guys in the not too far distant future. What we learned is that some of the typical incentives that we all think we should be doing are missed. Oh my gosh, we're too expensive, we should be, forcing rents to be in a certain range. Oh my goodness, we should force retail to be on the first floor. Oh, we should give rebates so that, if people are required to update their signs, they get a break of $200. Doesn't mean anything. Incentivizing in terms of, for example, development in a no man's land, should the village decide to do that, by creating solid, thoughtful, practical guidelines and benchmarks, we're going to be taking the first critical step, because every developer that came to talk to us and everyone else familiar said, you know what, we hate walking into a community and not knowing what they want. So that being able to say, these are the values important to us, but we're not telling you what to build and what to put there. But we're creating a framework for what we really need, and which we haven't done yet. Here's the process. We need a process so that things are predictable. People know what they're going to be looking at. They can actually do cost estimates. They can actually come and visit with us and know what they would be getting themselves into. That, in a sense, is a very important incentive. We have not really had someone on staff whose business it is to recruit businesses to Glencoe. I've heard a lot about that personally from people. Should we do it? Should we not? Why don't we have somebody that is bringing us a bakery? I hear that from one person all the time. Really, I guess, likes baked goods and doesn't want to go far to get them. But it's a really interesting question. We have, as a community, a long-standing tradition of respect for the marketplace. That came up very strongly, when we were talking a couple of years ago about some slope and how to create regulations that gave as much freedom as possible to the individual property. We really have a tradition, but we don't want to tell businesses what they should put in the building. They're going to know. The market's going to tell us what's going to be most acceptable and helpful. The question is, how can we help them? How can we be helpful so that we're creating a Glencoe that's optimized in its Glencoe-ness? That's another thing we've really learned that confirms the approach that we took on all the new legislation that we've done in the past 10 years. Everything has to be Glencoe specific. We need a bespoke suit. We need something that's built for us. It's one of the great things about what's emerging in our work is that what's emerging is very organic. We haven't rushed. We've kind of waited until these themes and, we listened and listened and listened, and suddenly we're hearing what's Glencoe. And maybe the coolest thing about the process is that while all of us could describe things we love about the community, we today for this plan are starting to understand why. Why are we a community that's loved so much? Why? Why? Because in some sense we are physically the perfect economic ecosystem in terms of where our market circles are. Why? Because from the standpoint of urban form, we happen to create volumes of spaces that are the ones that people love to be in. We're really starting to understand why we are the community that nobody wants to have change. And when we understand that, we can, in a sense, get the equivalent of a mission statement to know what we have to adhere to. Here's the stuff that we can't alter from. Everything else, we can be innovative and creative. So I think we need to get to the point of saying, what's the right way in an environment where we respect the market, but we want to create some of these benchmark consensual values that are not negotiable. What's the right way to market the best Glencoe downtown that we can create? It's an important issue.
Karen, wouldn't it be fair to say that one of the reasons that you've done a spectacular job and been able to put all this together is in your planning and approach in the Plan Commission? Back when we were going out to see what to do with Writers Theater and to blend that question together with what you just talked about. Starting in 1998, when the Economic Commission group was talking about let's get a marriage between writers and the Women's Library Club that led to the catalyst of these things, that the thought was the time when we redo the comprehensive plan was a time that was designed for when writers then made their decision, raised their money, were coming here, and we looked at them as a catalyst for where the downtown goes in the future. And now, how do we handle getting that catalyst going? What should we be doing so that the development that follows fits into our Glencoe-ness, as we call it?
Yes, and the two key ideas in that are first, that during the process of working with writers and also asking ourselves, let's make sure we know that this is a good thing for Glencoe. We learned a lot about the positive economic spillover of having an organization like that. In fact, there were materials that were submitted to the board on kind of how much bang for the buck you get from a theater and how much vitality it brings into the community. I continue to be quite sure of the fact that that was not the driving force in this community. I believe that it was the driving force in another community that was interested in the theater. But this was about this community's love affair with this theater and wanting them here because they were Glencoe and they were born here. The second thing is that the truth is, until the theater is up and running for a year, 2 years, or 3 years, we're not going to entirely know. We're not going to entirely know the exact impact on parking. Fortunately, our staff is going to be working with them so that we have the option to impose valet, we have the option to try to manage that in different ways. But some of this is going to be about waiting to see. How many people from around the world come here? This is a building now that's, people may be visiting us from many different parts of the world. It may be that we could support a little inn that, where people might want to come for the weekend. We don't know that. We don't know that yet, and we won't know. So we need to be flexible enough in terms of our planning to not create something rigid. I think it's a very, very exciting time to be here. It's very, very exciting time.
We're very fortunate to have Karen here to help lead us through all this.
Well, I tell you, the commission is a tremendous group of people. And the staff, please remember that we decided to do this as a community by not going to a third-party consultant. We made a decision to do this with our staff. Not that they are not, outstanding. When we started this league, I think you were serving your term as president of the American Planning Association. I don't know if ASAP. Have you finished that, or are you still doing it?
I've got till second, 31st.
So, Lee is the national head of the professional organization planners. Wrote with Nathan's help the tutorial on best practices for comprehensive plans. We have a staff like no other, and there have been times when they've had to juggle. We know that because we kind of hoped they would have nothing else to do, but they seem to have other things to do. But I tell you, we're so, I can't begin to explain how fortunate we are, the thoughtfulness and dedication and absolute devotion to this community that the staff shows every single day. So that's very much, we wouldn't be here if it weren't with the staff that's working on it every single day.
And we've been blessed, having Lee and Jessica Associates, both when we were attracting writers, when we were figuring out how to
So
integrate Friends Park, all sorts of things that we do. They have been instrumental in making Glencoe very unique and have devoted a lot of love and care to us.
Absolutely. Thank you. So staff will now be taking all of this material and actually drafting various maps and starting to work on language, and we'll be doing that over the next couple of months. We are going to plan public open houses. We will come back to you, of course. We're going to be taking white papers and shaping them up into studies that really capture all of our data. And we'll look forward to being back with you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The next order of business is we have two proclamations before us this evening that are important proclamations. One is a member of the Zoning Commission, Jim Nesbitt, has just finished his 2 terms on the commission and has been devoted and done a splendid job, and so we have a proclamation recognizing that before us. And we also have, since we were talking about all of this planning and the importance of it, Writers Theater, we have a proclamation recognizing the founders, the Glencoe founder of the Writers Theater, and making a Writers Theater Founders Day proclamation, declaring a day when they're going to do their time capsule on that as the Writers Theater Founders Day proclamation. We've been blessed in terms of putting these things in place. Writers Theater won a wonderful award in terms of the National Endowment for the Arts, and that having to do with their work with the community and the type of development that went on as being a major and example of what one should be doing in terms of community work. And part of our good fortune is that we have so many people in Glencoe who have made major contributions to Writers Theater to permit them to create this splendid new building. And so we're recognizing them. And those are the 2 proclamations that are before us tonight. And so I would appreciate it if we could have a motion to adopt those 2 proclamations.
Second?
Can I have a voice vote? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, they pass unanimously. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention and announce tonight and just remind everybody is that we have one of our important events coming up, which is the annual Buckthorn Barbecue that will take place at Botanic Gardens on October 22nd. There are still tickets available in case anybody doesn't have their tickets. It's a very important event because the Friends of the Green Bay Trail do a phenomenally good job of working with the village and on behalf of the community and making the Green Bay Trail a great green space. And this is their one big fundraiser of the year, so I want to remind people, if you haven't gotten your tickets for that, please do so. The next village board meeting will be November the 19th, and of course before that will also be our committee of the whole meeting. On our regular agenda we have 2 items, 9 and 10, which relate to consideration of proposals to permit Washington Place have a special service area and to award contracts with respect to that, to move that forward. I'm going to ask Dave Mao to talk to us a little bit about that, and then we can look at adopting those. David?
Certainly, members of the board and both president. These two items, as noted, relate to the creation of a special service area for Washington Place. Washington Place is one of 11 private streets in the village of Glencoe, and the village staff has been working for some time with the residents of Washington Place to facilitate a process to bring the private road up to village standards and transfer the jurisdiction over to the village. Through the establishment of a special service area, the Washington Place Street and right-of-way will be improved and dedicated to the village for future maintenance responsibility. The process for approval and establishment of the special service area is directed by state statute and involves a number of steps, the first of which is the adoption of a proposing ordinance. So that's the first item before the board tonight. Staff recently met with property owners comprising the special service area to review updated pricing and bid pricing and total cost of improvements. As the board recalls, you previously approved a proposing ordinance in July. However, once bids were open and we saw those costs together with the engineering and legal expenses, the special service area funding on it had to be revised. So that the new proposing ordinance is in the packet and up for consideration tonight. Secondly, in August, staff opened bids for the reconstruction improvements on Washington Place that will be financed by the 5 property owners through the creation of the special service area. We had 6 bids that were received, and the lowest responsible bid was submitted by DeMayo Brothers of Elk Grove in the amount of $184,982. DeMayo has successfully completed several storm sewer and water main improvement projects for the village in the last decade, and each of those improvements was completed on time and within the project budgets. Given that need to revise the proposed cost for the special service area and reinitiate the special service area statutory process, the construction of the improvements will be delayed until 2016. DeMayo Brothers has agreed to the village awarding the contract for the Washington Place improvements now in October and delaying the start of the construction until spring of 2016. So given the desire of the owners of Washington Place to pursue a comprehensive improvement to this private roadway for dedication to the village, and the village receiving qualified bids for the improvement, staff recommends the board consider both the adoption of the proposing ordinance for the Washington Place special service area and authorizing the village manager to execute a contract with DeMayo Brothers for the Washington Place improvements for a cost not to exceed $184,982. With that, either the village attorney or myself can answer questions.
Any questions?
President Levin, I just want to add one thing to that very excellent presentation, and that is that the adopting ordinance that was mentioned also includes a provision repealing the earlier ordinance that was mentioned that you all adopted on July 16th, 2015.
So with the knowledge that the prior ordinance is repealed and replaced with the new ordinance, Peter, you had 2 questions.
Sorry. First off, I was curious about the presence of a resident engineer. What is the owner's representative in our case? How are we tracking the progress of this recreation of the street to make sure it meets the right standards before we take adoption of the actual asset?
Well, 2 things. The board authorized the engineering design agreement earlier in the spring, and so that work has been done by an outside consultant that has been our primary street consultant. Has actually historically has been involved in our street program for the last 25 years, working under the direction and review of staff. That was the design that was ultimately put out for bid in August. With respect to construction observation, we will likely do the majority of that in-house with some support from that same it's outside consultant, Hampton, Lindsay, and Glencoe is that firm. But in order to keep costs down, again, these costs are borne primarily by the special service area, and we will likely handle that construction observation in-house, which is not uncommon for us.
And then before accepting the asset, we'll have they've met certain performance criteria within this contract so that we know it's been built to specification, that we're not accepting an asset that was somehow, not up to the.
Absolutely, and that involves daily construction observation duties. This is not spot inspection. It involves a resident engineer, someone serving in that role on site daily when the contract work is underway.
And to summarize, the in-house staff, with the help of the people that designed it, will oversee the day-to-day construction. So you'll know that it was built.
It will be, be not fooled. The spring of 2016 will be an extremely busy time. If you recall, we're in two storm sewer contracts on the street, so we'll have our hands full, but we will be done before.
Any other questions? May I have a motion to adopt both of the resolutions in the order that we discussed?
An ordinance and a resolution.
An ordinance and a resolution. That's it.
Second?
Do I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney?
Yes.
Trustee Pierce?
Yes.
Trustee Thomas?
Yes.
Trustee Vree?
Yes.
Okay, the next order of business before us, as you recall, when we had Wright and Glencoe Day and we were going through this, the Historic Society has been working on a project and raising funds to reconstruct the Frank Lloyd Wright designed waiting station over on Maple Hill. And what's before us tonight is the consideration of the ordinance granting special use for that proposal, and also the authorization for the village to enter into the intergovernmental agreement with the Park District for them to take over maintaining it as it's built. Are there questions?
I have a question. Regarding putting the station in, should they not raise the needed funds and are unable to do so? What would happen?
The land reverts back to the village, and I'm not sure if there are other questions that anyone may have. I can give a little bit more context. This board wasn't seated really the last time we talked about this particular topic, and Ed Goodale, who's I think changing his name to Ed Lloyd Goodale because of the work that he's done on the Frank Lloyd Wright efforts that the Historical Society has really just concluded a couple of weeks ago, is here and can answer some questions from the Historical Society's perspective. But what we're talking about really are two points, and looking at the resolution executing the or authorizing the execution of the IGA with the Park District really takes a step back to some conversations we had late in 2014 about the Historical Society's plan to reconstruct the station. At the time, it was determined, because of the improvements that they're also seeking to make to Park 7N, which is immediately adjacent to this area, that it would make sense for the Park District to take control of the land that the station would be built on top of. And so that intergovernmental agreement is intended to memorialize the agreement between the village and the Park District for that land transfer. The Park District has taken the first step, which is to approve an ordinance seeking that land transfer, and they did that back in August. The second agenda item that relates to this topic is the zoning variance that the Zoning Commission is recommending, which was, as I recall, a setback variance related to the property. But the easy answer to your question, as I've said, is if the Historical Society is unsuccessful in raising the necessary funds, then the land would revert back to the village.
And just to add that a little bit, we've looked at issues involving if we improve the interconnect with Highland Park in order to have better emergency water supply and things, the impact of that on Green Bay, on the trail. And all that was taken into account when this was all designed and where we would put this in the relationship, this station, to the Jen Jensen Park that is going to be reconstructed as part of this, with the Park District and all in all. It's a very exciting development. And I think Ed is going to move his home and live there when it's done, along with the monuments. Any other questions?
Just a quick follow-on to Trustee Bree's question, there's a time limit, I assume, on this raising of the funds, or is it open-ended?
It's open-ended, and that is to give them the most flexibility. It's not going to be an insubstantial fundraising effort that they're undertaking, but that if they in turn relay to the Park District that they're unable to raise the adequate funds, at that point is when the land would revert back.
Where's the waiting station right now?
It does not exist. It was torn down in the 1950s when the North Shore Electric line was decommissioned, which ultimately became the right-of-way the village was able to acquire, ultimately became the Green Bay Trail. And so the station won't be placed exactly in its historic location, Ed, but it'll be very close to it as we've tried to ascertain, but will be actually creating an amenity for the Green Bay Trail users as well as the park users, to be hopefully perhaps a restroom facility for the trail as well as an opportunity for historic storytelling as well. So if you'd like, sure.
Sure. Thank you. You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
Actually, this originally, the idea to reconstruct this station actually originally came from the mid-2000s, 2005, I think it was, an idea to do this. And at that time, the project languished and just wasn't a successful project, and it didn't move forward. But then, be it good or bad, during our Frank Lloyd Wright centennial celebration, it came up in committee that we should re-energize this project. And also good or bad, I said, gee, how about doing the park next door? So it's now grown from rebuilding this small station to a substantial project, and we're looking probably the mid-six figures for the cost on the reconstruction and the development of the park.
And would you comment a little bit on the origin of the park? Was Jen Jensen designed it to be in conjunction with the Frank Lloyd Wright development that was there, and then this was the waiting station for the North Shore Railway? Perhaps you can give them a little background, because both of those gentlemen are very famous.
Yes, actually. In fact, this really will commemorate, I think, three gentlemen there. Sherman Booth was the original owner of the property in that area that's now called Ravine Bluffs, and originally was going to build a grand estate there. Unfortunately, the costs on that were significantly more than the family could bear, so they stepped back and had Frank Lloyd Wright design a development there, a subdivision. And Jensen was the landscape architect, both for the original grand estate and then also for the development of Ravine Bluffs. So this will commemorate not only Frank Lloyd Wright and Jens Jensen, but also Sherman Booth, who was, of course, the owner, and who was also one of the founding members of the park board. So that particular piece of property has been identified there as a park for basically for the last 100 years. So we're excited to be able to really bring this to fruition with the help of Nick Patera at the Tesca Associates. He has so far donated all the design work to get this project going. This will in fact be one of a string, I call a string of pearls down the trail. There's a Jensen Park in the Virginia Business District. There will be this park. There is a park in Kenilworth, right by the metro lines there. So it's really, we're really developing Jensen's presence all along the North Shore.
Just a note, the village attorney has reminded me that I misspoke. There is a termination date in the intergovernmental agreement, and it is December 31st of 2017.
Which we can always extend if necessary. Any other questions?
Peter, quick comment, increasing your scope a little bit, since we've mentioned the Buffalo Barbecue, it would be nice if you could also adopt some of the Green Bay Trail restoration concepts associated with this facility, which is of course on the Green Bay Trail. And I'm sure you're thinking about that, but it helps to connect it.
We've had conversations with a lot of the user groups and the beneficial groups at the trail, and they're going to be incorporated. Their thoughts are incorporated in the final design once that's determined. But absolutely, yeah, there is a lot of work in Brevin, I think, in the area that we're talking about here. A lot of volunteer plants and small trees that will need to be definitely taken care of. A lot about that.
Any other question? If not, could I have a motion to adopt each of the provisions of the ordinance in the resolution?
So moved.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney?
Yes.
Trustee Pierce?
Yes.
Trustee Thomas?
Yes.
Trustee Green?
Yes.
Ed, thank you for all of your outstanding work on all of these different projects and for being here tonight to help shepherd us through.
Thank you.
Okay, the last order of business tonight is a motion to adjourn to closed session pursuant to section 2C1 of the Open Meetings Act involving the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of a specific employee of the village.
So moved.
Second?
Roll call.
Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney?
Yes.
Trustee Pierce?
Yes.
Trustee Thomas?
Yes.
Trustee Green?
Yes.
We are adjourned.